Hello everyone, I, Furam Patel, would like to warmly welcome you all to the next session or the unit of the jurisprudence or the legal theory. Now friends, in the previous unit we discussed the concept of the rights, duties, wrongs. Along with that, we also discussed the concept of the liability, status and the concept of the title. Now, when we are talking about the rights and the duties, if you remember, I mentioned one of the things that when one person is having a relationship with his or her own property, so that means that relationship would be having one or the other name. We do know that what one person's relationship with the other properties can be called as. So, this relationships has certain names. Now, those establishment of the relationships does happen when the requirements or the essential elements are fulfilled. Those names or the tags of those relationship can be called as the possession and the ownership over the property of an individual. So friends, in this video, we shall be starting with discussing very interesting topic under the jurisprudential concept of the legal theory about ownership and the possession. So friends, let's get started. So, under the concept of the ownership and the possession, we shall be discussing different definitions, concepts and the kinds of the ownership and the possession. Then, main important aspect of what is the difference between the ownership and the possession. Along with that, when we are talking about the properties ownership and possession, it becomes very essential for all of us to understand what are the different kinds of the property. So friends, let's get started. Starting with the definition and the concept of the ownership. So friends, I would like to pose a question here that can you define ownership or do you know what do you mean by ownership? So if I am saying that I have paid a certain amount of consideration for an example for this phone, so then I can state that this phone is under my ownership. So that means I have ownership over this phone. Let's look into the different definitions given by the different jurists and the concept also. The ownership refers to the relation that a person has with an object that he owns. As I stated, of course, it is an aggregated of all the rights that he has with regard to the said object. That means, my friends, that I would be having all kind of rights with the object that I own. Now these rights are rights in rem. That is, they can be enforced against the whole world and not against only any individual. So that means, my friends, that if I am stating that I have an ownership over this phone, then that would mean that I have this ownership or all kinds of rights with regard to usage of this phone, destroyal also, or rather anything that I would like to do over this phone. So these rights that I have just named, I will be enjoying these rights against the whole world. That is what you call the rights in rem. The concept of the ownership flows from the possession. Of course, I can be the owner, but for that to enjoy all kind of rights, I do need the possession over that property. In the primitive societies, there was no idea of the ownership, of course, because there was no idea of the possession. There was no idea at all. The only concept that they identified was that of the possession. It was only after they started settling down by buying the homes and cultivating lands that they developed the idea of the ownership. When I stated that at that time when the primitive societies were there in existence, the idea of the possession also was not there. What I meant was the people, they were just developing the things. They did not have any feelings about this is owned by me or this is what my property looks like. So when the development took place, later on, slow by slow, when the time went away, these rights were cultivated. This concept cannot be defined subjectively, but of course our jurists have tried to put it in a very beautiful ways. According to Austin, as you can see on the screen, ownership refers to a right identified for the indefinite in point of users, unrestricted in point of disposition and unlimited for the time of the duration. That means, my friend, that according to Austin, if one person is having ownership over one property, then that person would be having all the kind of the right with regard to the disposition, use and time limit, that is the duration, of course. Now, coming back to the other definition given by Salmon, that is the ownership in its most comprehensive significations denotes the relationship between a person and the right that is vested in him. That means that Salmon is of the opinion that the rights are vested in an individual with regard to the object that he owns. And it's of course the relationship that binds two people, or rather it gives the idea of the rights over one property for an individual. Now this definitely would put a question that then what are the essentials of the ownership, because both the definitions are giving different kinds of the definition of the ownership. So then there are certain essentials of the ownership which we can prove after analyzing all the definitions. So the essentials of the ownership are mainly the indefinite point of users, unrestricted point of the disposition, right to possess, right to exhaust, residuary character and right to destroy or alienate. So friends, for an example, if I am just going to take one example for the rest of the slides. Okay, so if I have the complete ownership, or if I am stating that I have the ownership over my phone, then I can state that I can use the phone as much as I want. I can sell my phone whenever I want. I can give my phone on rent to somebody, or even without rent to somebody if I want. I can put my phone, or I can keep my phone wherever I want. I can destroy my phone, I can throw my phone away, or I can dispose of my phones. I can dispose of the memory, or rather any relevant information which is there in it. Reason being that I do have complete ownership of that property. That would make me having the complete right over that particular property. Let's have a look at the essentials in a little bit in-depth manner. The first essential is the indefinite point of the users. The owner of the property has the liberty to use it, of course, and it also has the liberty to restrict other people. As we stated that ownership denotes the rights in rem. That means if I can use my phone, then I can restrict anybody else from using it. Next point, unrestricted point of disposition. The owner has the right to dispose of the property at his own will. A person needs to have the ownership of a thing in order to transfer that ownership to somebody else. Now, for an example, my friends, if this phone is not under my ownership, or I do not own this phone, then can you think that I can give this phone to anybody that I want? No, my friends, you can never do that. So, to make any transactions or to transfer the ownership of the property that you own, you need to have a complete ownership of that thing. Next point, my friends, is right to possess. The owner has the right to possess that thing whichever he owns. Of course, it is very well stated. Next is right to exhaust. Now, this is a very interesting essential point. If the nature of the thing which is owned is such that it can be exhausted, then the owner has the right to exhaust it all at his own will. That means I will be having all kind of possible rights over the things that I possess, even including the right to exhaust. Now, my friends, exhaust means usage of that property in its complete manner. That means I can use the property completely. Alright. Getting back to the next point is the residuary character. Now, the owner may part with several rights with regard to the things he owns. This does not take away the ownership from him. That means, my friends, that even if I am not having the phone in my possession right now, that won't make me not the owner of the object, of course. Reason being that I do have the residuary character. Wherever my phone would be, it would be under my possession until I wish to change the same. The next and the last point is the right to destroy or alienate. Of course, as I stated that I can throw my phone away without anybody else's permission, because I do have the right to destroy the property that I own. Now, when we are stating about these essentials of the ownership, we are mentioning quite a lot about the properties, or rather the subject matter. So that would come to the next slide, which talks about the subject matter of the ownership. So friends, when we are talking about the subject matter of the ownership, one of the subject matter of the ownership is of course the material object. Salmond is of the opinion that the real subject matter of the ownership is right, of course. Now this particular view of the Salmond is supported by the common law system, because if you have the ownership, the subject matter would be under your command, and that means you would have complete right over that subject matter. However, it has also received some amount of criticism, of course, because can you not even own a thing which is not subject matter as according to the Salmon's view? Then the criticism is stating that the generally recognition of the ownership is of the land or chattels, or not only of the rights. A person is said to have certain rights and not own the rights. That means the criticism is between ownership having the right or ownership of the right. Now this criticism decides the subject matter. But friends, can you really decide the subject matter of the ownership? Because if I am stating that this is my property, then that would imply that I have all the rights of the ownership over that property. So then the subject matter of the ownership definitely becomes the material objects. Then this discussion would pose another question, that then can you own the air, or rather the jungles or the water which is there and which you use also? Then that becomes the system of the state, that it is not only about the ownership which is recognized. We also can use certain property which is not only under our ownership, but rather not in our name, but as a subject matter of the ownership. Yes, I do own them all. So friends, that means as the subject matter of the ownership is a complicated issue when we are talking about the ownership. But it of course depends upon a state to make it as an object for owning according to the concepts. So friends, this was all about the definition of the ownership, the essentials that can be derived from the definitions of the ownership, and the subject matter of the ownership. In next video, we shall be discussing certain other aspects of the ownership concept. Till then, keep learning.